Keith is, listen, for somebody who hasn't been with us in the physical form in 34 years, he still resonates really, really intensely. It's not an accident. He set it up that way. He set it up so that, his intensity would continue beyond his own life.
Yo, this is Reg Ferguson, Fashion Geek #1. How are you? Welcome to the ride. Thank you so much for listening. I'm a men's fashion consultant here in New York City, and I help everyday men go from fashion confused to fashion confident. If you ever found yourself staring at the closet, not knowing what to wear, or if the idea of shopping for clothes makes you feel physically ill, then this is the show for you. My goal with every episode is to help make looking good feel easy. If you ever want my help, email me at reg@nyfashiongeek.com for a consultation. If you have a friend who's looking to level up his fashion style wardrobe game, please share an episode with them. While you're at it, if you dig the show and haven't already left us a rating and review, please consider doing so now. Your shares, ratings, and reviews help us grow the show and help us get the best possible guests and help more men dress their best. All right, guys, for people who are just hearing it and not seeing it, I am probably blushing and gushing. And you're going to understand why. Because today, we're going to talk with Gil Vazquez, who's the executive director of the Keith Haring Foundation. And we're here in Soho. And we're not only just here in Soho, we're in the very space, a very special space. And we're going to talk about something the everyday man should have an interest in. What was the influence hip-hop had on Keith Haring? And what influence did Keith Haring have on hip-hop? Gil, Jibo the Pro in the building. Thank you.
Pleasure, bro.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure's mine, man.
We've been working on this for literally 5 years.
We've been talking about this for some time, and here we are.
Yeah, I always get my man, but I don't know. I'm gonna continue cheesing this. We've talked about this and how we met, and actually, big shout out to my friend Elizabeth Burke, sorry Liz, aka Fizz, who made sure that we met in 2019 at the Bonham auction, and I'm gonna weave that in. That's how we met, and here we are. Yeah. So again, for people who see me, you see this will be like this for the entire interview. But for people who are just listening, I'm really on a cloud. I couldn't be happier. So, Gil, before we go into our topic, please tell us, so what do you do?
So currently, I am the executive director and president of the Keith Haring Foundation. At the tender age of 19, Keith asked me to be a part of this foundation that he was creating. And my answer to him was, what's a foundation?
Legit 19, right?
19, yeah. I didn't know what a foundation was. And he explained that it was a way for us to continue his generosity, to expand his legacy on his behalf, and give grants to organizations that cared about kids, cared about people that were struggling with HIV. So 34 years later, that is essentially what we are still doing.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the great thing about every time Gil and I have interacted, and I'm really curious to see how it gets translated into this interview, is our paths have sometimes mirrored, sometimes crossed, because we're both native New Yorkers. And here we are at 676 Broadway. So I'm going to tell Gil something that he has no idea about. So first of all, I went to NYU. I went to Stern School of Business. So, and one of my major buildings was 715 Broadway. He knows, and again, he's met a gazillion people like me. I'm a very big Keith Haring fan. So when I went to the Bonham's auction, and like I said, I'd like to talk about that hopefully eventually. I think this is a spin the wheel interview. I know the topic, but I got a real funny feeling.
We're gonna veer off a couple times.
I got a funny feeling.
gonna veer off, I think.
I had no idea that I was blocks away from my hero, and that this is his actual studio space.
Yeah.
In addition, last night I was home, and I'm a big movie guy, and Saturdays usually dedicated to movies, but Friday I was home. I was like, I'm gonna watch a movie tonight, and I went into Max, and they had this thing for TCM, Turner Classic Movies, 30th anniversary. I go in, and I've always wanted to watch this movie, and you're gonna understand the significance, because I know we are literally around the block, and you probably have some reference to that too, as I'm about to already go off on a detour. I watched Vasquez last night. I had always wanted to see it, never saw it. That's literally around his studio, working with Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
That was his
It's around the block.
Around the corner.
It's around the corner.
Down the block, which I know you know from here, the offices of Def Jam.
Yeah, this neighborhood was alive with culture. Keith took this studio in 1984.
Wow.
He moved from the Cable Building, which is on Houston and Broadway, which I believe he had a smaller studio then, and he moved into this one in 1984. I think the rent back then was something like $2,000 a month. And this is like maybe like a 3,500 square foot studio. And we're here, you know, I said 84, right? So we're in 2024. So that's 40 years, essentially, that we have occupied this space.
You know, we've talked about this, but hopefully the listeners will be appreciative of what I have to share and to add. I grew up just across town. I grew up in the Westfield. And then I went to live with my late grandparents up in the Bronx, where the people were fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking the train to go to school. And when I'm in Manhattan, I'm seeing these images on the black advertising paper. And you see my face, and off we went. I was like, who is this? What is it? And then I found out who it was, and my love affair, my fandom from afar started then.
So I went to high school. I'm originally from Spanish Harlem,
Right, El
uptown, right, El Barrio.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to high school in Brooklyn. I went to Brooklyn Tech.
You went to Tech? Okay.
My first high school was Tech. I went
Okay.
there to my junior year, and then
Okay.
I transferred to Manhattan Center.
What?
Yep, and that's where I graduated from.
Okay.
So going from El Barrio to Nevins Street on
Yep.
the number 4 or 5, I saw like all these blank advertisement panels that were, you know, these chalk drawings were on them. And you know, like as New Yorkers, we tune out a lot of stuff.
Yeah, easily.
We tune out advertisement. You know, like when we're walking, you know, there's not peripheral vision. It's like you're going to work, you're on your way, and there's not a lot of distraction that you have bandwidth for. But those drawings like stopped you in your tracks. Certainly stopped me in my tracks. I didn't understand what they were. I didn't know if they were selling something. I didn't know if it was like some secret cult kind of thing, like it was some, you know, something that you had to
I vaguely remember that as one of
like
my
something
memories.
to be like in on, like
Right.
like you had to be in on some secret to understand what was, you know, what it was, because there were no words generally. So you know, they were curious to me. I was like, what is this? And you know, the more I saw them, the more intrigued I was, the more I enjoyed them on my way to school. And fast forward years later, like I find out like, oh, this is Keith Haring, and oh, you know, like he has the Pop Shop, which is not far from here, which was on Lafayette.
Yep.
You know, for as much as Keith was an icon in art, icon as far as activism goes, as far as generosity goes, to me, he was one of the sort of godfathers of streetwear, right? So as we bring this into fashion,
Yeah, really eager
you know,
to talk about this.
as we bring this into fashion, Keith doesn't get really his due, like in terms of being one of the fathers of streetwear.
That's why I felt, when Liz brought us together, and I told you I had a podcast, and you probably heard 100 people say they had a podcast. I knew the angle I wanted. I knew that would set me apart because, I have literally checked you out at speaker events talking about the legacy of Keith Haring, which I've enjoyed each one. But every time I went, no one's doing this angle. No one's doing this angle.
So it's very rare that people acknowledge that. So from a fashion standpoint, right?
Yes,
and let's put hip hop and fashion together.
Yes,
right?
please.
In hip hop fashion, what we have always done is we have adopted brands.
Yep.
Right? So Carhartt.
Yep.
Carhartt was not marketed to us.
No.
Timberland, not marketed to us.
Nope.
Adidas, not ever marketed to us.
Nope.
Lee's, which was like the hip hop uniform in the 80s.
Absolutely.
They had no idea that we existed.
Correct.
They had no idea that this bubbling, this burgeoning hip hop culture existed, and they were just doing what they do.
Right.
And we adopted fashion. It didn't occur to us back then in the 80s to create. Right, we adopted. We styled it the way we styled it.
Right, we were consumers. We weren't creators.
We were not manufacturing these things. We were not creating these things until the 90s came.
Right.
So that's the difference between adopting fashion, right, or adopting brands that become synonymous with hip hop, BVD, Lee's, Timberland, all the stuff, right. And then Keith comes along, and at the end of doing these subway drawings, which he did them from 1980 to 1985, right? And then it became unsustainable. Unsustainable because now people are stealing them off the wall. Like people are literally going to Astor Place and seeing, the panel that's up there and literally ripping the entire panel, frame and all, off the wall.
I did not know that.
So it became unsustainable to do it.
Okay.
Right? Wow. So as an extension of that project of generosity, right, of access, he created the Pop Shop. Right? It's like, what? You want access to the art? Instead of, for people that can't buy a then $20,000 painting, you could get a $25 shirt. And that was the beginning of his sort of extension of access to art. Art is for everybody was his mantra.
And that's what I loved as I was growing up and learning about him. I would always tell people, and particularly a mentor of mine who was so kind to take me to the Queens Museum when he had Future Primeval.
Yep.
I had that book, by the way.
Yeah.
So I was gonna bring it. I was like, that's probably too extra. So that's what I loved, that this guy wanted to bring art and make it accessible to everyone. And as a kid growing up here in the city, not that I wasn't exposed, because I was culturally, but I just found that to be so distinct.
It was distinct because at that point, people thought about art as being elite and inaccessible.
Absolutely.
And only for people that go to museums and only for people that go to galleries, right? So, people like me would not necessarily feel welcome into a museum or into a gallery. We it's not that we weren't welcome, it's just that we didn't feel it. It's not something that we necessarily grew up in our households, like going to galleries or museums like that. Not uptown anyway. You know what I'm saying?
I
I'm not saying that that's true.
I know
That's not the case for everybody. But uptown was not necessarily a part of my world. And Keith Haring was the first sort of entry point where I felt like, oh, I can participate in this. Like I can have access to this too. And this is very cool. So through the Pop Shop, it's like if you could buy a t-shirt, you could buy a hat. Back then they had the long shirts, that really long, like almost like dress length, that had like a almost like a totem motif in the front. So it was just like all this like really cool stuff happening, and it was I felt like I had access to art, and it didn't feel snooty, and it didn't feel like above me. It felt
Right.
like right on my level.
Right.
So that is what the Pop Shop was to me.
Well, I love the Pop Shop. Prior to this interview, Gil knows. Well, first of all, it's just so funny. You don't know how people are checking you out. So I come in and there were 1 or 2 coats I was going to wear today based on the weather. And the other one, it was going to be too light. I was like, well, it's 50 degrees.
I know.
So I was like, all right, I'm going to wear this other coat. And he immediately sees that I have literally a golden button on my Hugo Boss M65 of the Radiant Child.
Yep. That's an OG button.
It is an OG button, and I got it
Yep.
at the Pop Shop.
That's dope.
So, and I also showed you another one. Also,
Yep.
like I said, I was fortunate enough. You know, it's here where I grew up,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Yeah.
across
This was
town
your
from where I grew up.
backyard.
This was my backyard. So when that shop opened, I remember me and my friends, we were so excited. And we went in there, and you remember the floor, and just
Yeah,
and
you
it
know,
was that curve.
the other thing
right
too,
beside Gassiteria.
Yeah, the other thing too was that, you know, for as much as Broadway was a shopping center, right? Like we would shop at Canal Jean,
Unique Antique
Unique
Boutique,
Boutique,
Yeah.
Antique Boutique.
And
all
even
those
your
stores.
store that I told you, I remember the name.
Akajo.
Yeah, because I had an Akajo button.
Yeah, I used to
But
work
yeah,
there.
yeah.
So back then, Lafayette was no man's land.
Nothing.
There was nothing on Lafayette.
Nothing.
So how retail exists there now is very much due to the pioneer, Keith Haring.
Yeah, when you
the
think
first-
about it, yeah,
the first-
he was the anchor.
Cool clothing store
Absolutely.
that appeared on Lafayette was the Pop Shop. So-
Absolutely. You're welcome, Supreme.
Exactly. Everybody owes a debt to
Yeah, Brooklyn
to Keith.
Industries.
All of y'all.
Yeah, for real. So, you know, I go to the store, and like you said, there was something for everyone. I was a big button guy growing up. Like I think a lot of kids
Yeah,
are.
I think we were.
Yeah, so that's mainly what I got. So now, like I said, here we are. Here's the Pop Shop. Here we are currently. Around the corner is this. Around the corner is that. Down the block is that. I want to go back to Def Jam. Def Jam was literally a block south, right? So, you know, I want to, as we're both doing, I want to hone in on Keith and hip hop. Unbeknownst to me, I copped a 12-inch of, actually it wasn't even 12 inch, it was an EP. And for the youngins, you could Google that. That's an extended play 12-inch. So,
It's like a mini album.
right, it's like a mini album. And I haven't even checked to see if Apple has this on their stream. But I bought Malcolm McLaren's Do You Like Scratching with the world famous Supreme team. And the album cover is cool and it's weird and it's interesting. Malcolm McLaren hit the airwaves here in New York, remember, particularly on KISS,
Yep.
98.7, which is now what?
It's
ESPN.
ESPN.
Ugh. We hear Buffalo Gals.
Yep.
We lose our minds.
Yep.
It's the banger of that summer. The fall enters, and I cop that EP. And there's a boombox on there
With the horns.
Yeah,
Keith
yeah,
Haring.
right. But there's these,
Right.
and I'm like, is that the guy?
It's the guy.
So to me, that's my first entree of seeing him connected with hip hop culture.
Right. So I feel that Keith, he's originally from a very small conservative town in Pennsylvania called Kutztown.
Yeah, Kutztown.
Right? Comes to New York and is just wowed by everything that he's seeing, right? All the graffiti that's on the train, all the bombing that's happening in New York City is
Great
super
time.
interesting to him, but that's not what he wants to do. He draws a lot of inspiration from it. The whole concept of getting up in graffiti is how you earn your respect,
Yeah.
right? It's if you're all city, that was like a badge of honor. Like if you're all city, like what? Like who gets to be all city? It's like you had to put the work in to be
Yeah, that was a
considered
crown.
a king, right?
Yeah.
A graffiti king. All city was like these sort of these badges, these honorary badges that you would have if you got respect in that community, and that community, it's very difficult to earn respect. I think Keith, when he first got here, was considered an anomaly and a curiosity, right? Because he's not using spray,
Right.
number one. He's not using markers.
Right.
He's using chalk.
Chalk.
So people are kind of looking at him like, and you doing what? You doing stick figures, bro? So the community is looking at him like a curiosity more so than, like one of them.
Right.
And as he progressed on this art project of putting these chalk drawings in the subway stations, they were like, oh, as he became more ubiquitous, as he becomes all city,
Literally.
then the respect comes. Then it's like, oh, okay, this guy, he's not doing what we do, but damn, we respect him. And he's getting respect from all the top, from the Futuras, from the Hazes, from the, Days, Does, all those guys, are like giving it up. People like Mayor, young culture creators. Mayor's like 14 at the time, and he's like dictating culture at a point. It's and Keith is eager to earn their respect, but also careful not to do what they do.
Right. And
He didn't give himself a graffiti name. He stood Keith Haring. You know what I'm saying? So he respected what was happening in the street, but was not trying to do the same thing. There was a no biting rule
Yep.
at the time that was
Yep.
very strictly enforced at the
Absolutely.
time. So not only in graffiti art but also in hip hop.
Absolutely.
Hip hop was the sound of the times. Uptown culture and downtown culture were melding and clashing and mixing. So punk rock and hip hop were, often at the same place. People like Crazy Legs and his
Richard.
Rocksteady crew
Yep.
are coming downtown to perform, for the first time. And people in the audience, there's photos where you see Keith and you see all these people that were like downtown icons. So it was a really interesting time, and Keith drew a lot of inspiration from not only hip hop music, but hip hop culture.
I agree. What I noticed now as an adult, because I didn't really figure it out as a child, I'm not going to be revisionist. First of all, when you talk about the respect from the graph community, I remember I know of one notable collabo he actually did, in which I guess it was that mutual respect literally, represented, was with him in Spaceman, Eric Orr.
Right. Eric Orr, he did a collab on a subway drawing, which is very unusual for Keith. And Eric Orr is OG, part of the history.
Absolutely.
Still active.
Spaceman.
Still doing his thing.
I love that
first
song.
First hip hop comic book. Like he is, a legend, and still very active, and still represents the culture fully. Man, Eric is a G.
As I look at this wonderful box that I have my notes on, this is the point I want to make. I think, and you were literally there, I think, like you said, Keith comes to New York, everything is bubbling, right? He's there in the 80s, as a young adult, right? Versus me in the 80s as a little kid. But what I'm seeing here is literally the influence of boogieing, of b-boying.
Yeah. I mean, all of it, all the cultures that were clashing at the time. There was new things that were just burgeoning. I mean, Blondie appeared on SNL and brought the Funky 4+1 More as her guest.
I don't remember this.
So you gotta peep the YouTube.
What?
It was the first.
Funky 4+1?
It was the
One of my
first.
favorite groups.
It was the first time that hip hop was on Saturday Night Live. Number one, and number two, the way they were set up, the DJ was in the front.
What?
You know how the DJ plays the back in most shows
yeah.
nowadays? The DJ was in the front. and the Funky Four plus one more were behind the DJ. That's how
What?
That's how important the DJ was in hip hop culture, how it was
Absolutely.
structured. But Blondie, Deborah Harry, brought Funky Four plus one more onto Saturday Night Live. You gotta peep that.
Yeah, you totally, wow.
Gotta peep that.
You
So there
got
was a
me.
lot happening. There was
Right.
a lot happening where, you know, people like Lady T, God, what am I? Square Biz.
Oh, Tina Marie.
Tina Marie.
Tina Marie.
So Tina Marie
Love Tina Marie.
is dropping verses
Yeah.
on Square Biz.
Square Biz. Great song. Classic.
White lady.
Right. We thought she was Puerto Rican on our side.
White lady. And when I have listened to this verse again, like
Mhm.
today in 2024, I'm like, yo, somebody had to have written that for her because it is so good.
It's dope.
It is so quality for 1982 that it came out.
It was
in.
ghost written.
I suspect, but I don't
Never
want
thought
to
of
take.
that. No, I know.
I don't want
I
to take
just-
credit.
Right.
I don't
never
want to
thought
take
of
credit from her
Right,
because
right,
it's
right.
such
Respect
a
the dead.
genius. It's such a genius piece of work. It's almost like saying like, nah, she couldn't have done that. Let's give her her due. Let's give her her
Great
due. But
artist.
Square Biz was, you know, again, like one of these, like hip hop was just, people were trying things with it. It was new. It was like generally very positive still. You know, the
Yeah, it was
gangsta
party.
element-
It was party
the
rap.
gangster element really had not come into it yet. So
Right.
it was just, you know, it was a lot of fun, and it was a way, it was a way to express yourself in many different ways. It was music, it was art, it was visual art, it was fashion. So it was language, because you know slang kind of played a big role in
Yeah.
you know. So it was a lot that was just really happening in hip hop at the time, and for somebody to come in as an outsider from outside of New York to come into that, you know, his head was probably spinning and after just
Absolutely.
all the craziness that he was witnessing and you know, lucky to have access to.
So, what do you think is his first, outside of literally being out there in the streets, being out there at the clubs, you know, even being at the galleries, I would presume. What do you think is like his, like for me, it was that Malcolm McLaren album. What do you think is like one of his watershed moments in which he literally is collaborating, you know, through hip hop?
You know, that might be the first thing. The Malcolm McLaren thing might be the very first thing. The thing that struck me the first time I saw it was when he did a poster with Adidas and Run DMC. I'm a DJ, so when I saw that, I was like, oh my God. And Run DMC was the top of the top. You know, like it did not get bigger than Run
No.
DMC. So to see his artwork with Run DMC like that was just like, wow, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're both Run DMC heads. I've
Yeah.
heard you talk about that, and people know I'm equal. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a nut
yeah,
about,
yeah, me
about
too.
Run DMC.
Yeah,
I am.
yeah. There's no question. So I've seen images of this poster. So that graphic is used for when they go on tour. When Run DMC goes on tour.
Yeah, I'm not 100% familiar.
Okay.
You know, the other thing that Keith participated in was the very first hip hop tour called the Fresh Fest.
Fresh Fest?
So behind the backdrop of Fresh Fest was a Keith Haring backdrop.
Whoa.
Also
Okay.
something to look up.
Whoa.
Gigantic backdrop, Keith Haring Fresh Fest,
Fresh Fest.
which was the first hip hop tour.
Yeah. Holy cow. How do you think this is happening? Because you just hit on something, right? This is a white guy from Kutztown. He comes to school here at SVA, School for Visual Arts. You know, he's finding his way. He's clearly accomplishing
Yeah.
doing that. But like, who says to him, "Hey, we've got this group called Run DMC. We want you to do artwork. Hey, we've got this tour for
I mean,
rap."
anybody
Like,
who is paying attention, like if you're paying attention and who's moving and who's shaking, the guy is working. The guy is covering every subway station with with his work, and he makes it hard for you not to notice him. So anybody who's anybody has to be like, yo, who's Keith? Bring him. Let's go. Like, you know, he's making it impossible for you to ignore him. I think that's how it's happening.
Okay. Well, I did some research, and DMC got interviewed about that backdrop, and he was like, yeah, Keith was mad cool, and you know,
I think it was done here.
Really?
It was done in this room.
Wow. Holy cow. Well, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, I come into this building, and first of all, I've never been in this building before for anything. I'm positive. And immediately I look up, and I'm like, oh man, this is really a setup for me.
He took a ladder downstairs one day and just painted a mural in the lobby. Just one day, randomly, just black paint. Just took a little, not even a bucket, almost like a you know, like a gallon of milk with the top cut off, black paint and a brush, and just that's it. And also in this building used to be Raucous Records.
Raucous was in this building?
Raucous Records was in this building. And back in the day, Platinum Island Studio was in this building.
I don't know that.
So if you look at certain records from back then, from the 80s, 90s, Platinum Island was a big recording studio. So now in this building, there's a Hit Factory recording studio in this building.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So a lot of famous people record here. A lot of famous people record in this building.
Whoa. Holy schmoly. I did not know that, ladies and gentlemen.
This is Slick Rick's favorite studio. Is
Hit Factory?
Is Hit Factory.
Oh, well. That's another episode talking about Slick Rick in fashion. So, also, you know, we're talking about Run DMC. I just realized he also did the artwork for Christmas in Hollis.
Christmas in Hollis, the Christmas albums.
Yes.
Every year.
Yep.
He used to do. I mean, you know, Keith is listen, for somebody who hasn't been with us in the physical form in 34 years. He still resonates really, really intensely. It's not an accident. He set it up that way. He set it up so that, you know, his intensity would continue beyond his own life. So
Kudos. So I want to still stay related, but in a slight lane. We're talking about the culture, but also, to me, because I think his vision, and I'm certainly not trying to speak for him, was to make art accessible to everyone. I found that it went beyond clearly music, meaning this. I'm going to be very specific, and I'd just like you to discourse on it. Crack is whack. Crack is whack, Mural. So, you know, meaning like he is clearly cognizant and aware of what's going on in the city at that time.
right.
We know that crack cocaine, as native New Yorkers, was an amazing scourge in this city in the 80s. So my point is, you know, I came in here wanting to talk about, you know, hip hop culture and him, but I would be remiss if we don't just talk about overall culture.
Yeah, I think the 80s was a difficult time, right? Nowadays it gets romanticized a
80s
lot,
was rough.
right? Because, you know, we think of all the amazing art and music and beauty that came out of the 80s, right? All the pop songs, even the pop songs were fire. Like it was, you know, hip hop, you know, even the pop songs, all that electro stuff was like really amazing. But, you know, it was also the Reagan era.
It was Reagan, guys. This is Reaganomics.
It was the Reagan era.
He hated New York.
He was a conservative in the presidency who came into office in January of 1981, did not mention AIDS until 1985. Did not mention AIDS. So crack and AIDS were like the 1-2 punch. that were happening in the world, really.
Yeah.
But specifically here in the city, it was a huge 1-2 punch. People's lives were just ruined. And Crack is Whack, Keith painted that mural. It was a personal thing for him because he had an assistant who actually was struggling with crack. And he did everything to help him and to help. And there were very few resources that were available to get help. Thankfully, this person persevered and is now a dad and now a promoter and is a success in life and got over it, thankfully. But he was one of the few. Most people did not come back from that. So Crack is Whack was very personal to Keith. It was not. It was an overall message.
Yeah, it was.
But it was also a very personal one.
Wow. Yeah, and if I recall, there's like a PE video, a Public Enemy video, and that group Chuck, he was hard on what was going on.
Yeah.
With the community.
I feel like Chuck and Keith were contemporaries. I met Chuck not too long ago.
Oh wow.
And he did not know Keith, but they were fighting the same fight. They stood up for lots of things. They were the voice of the voiceless. Keith used his art to speak truth to power, as did Chuck.
I now want to flip it from a very, very, very physical standpoint through fashion. Please talk about the involvement of Keith Haring through the foundation in merchandising.
So Keith was very specific about what he wanted to do in terms of his imagery, like how he wanted his imagery used. And he wrote that, a lot of the images that he created had not been used for commercial purposes at that point in his life. And he foresaw that the images that he created would be important. It was like a vault. It was like all these drawings I did, like in a vault, because guess what? One day we're gonna need to open that vault, and we're gonna have to create stuff, and we're gonna collaborate with brands, and we're gonna license. This is something that was inconceivable for a visual artist, a serious visual artist of his time.
Right, so he was way ahead.
He was way ahead.
So he articulated this.
He articulated this. He wrote this down and said that this is going to be the most important thing for the foundation to manage and oversee how these images are shared with the world. What was once a fairly decent licensing business, the Haring Foundation now, we have the gold standard of art licensing in the world. We are second.
Really?
We are second to none. There is no other artist that has as big an art licensing business than does the Keith Haring Foundation.
So please explain, what does it require for you to say you're the gold standard for art licensing? What does that mean? It
means that there's not even a close second. And no disrespect to...
I understand that.
No disrespect to anybody else that's doing it. It's just that Keith, the head start that he had in thinking about his IP and thinking that this was going to be a way to sustain the foundation. We're not putting the money in our pockets. We're using that money to give grants to organizations that he cared about. Just the foresight that takes is incredible. So I say it's the gold standard because I can't think of another artist, not Andy Warhol, again, respectfully.
Right.
There's no other artist that has the reach that Keith Haring does in the licensing world.
So what are the ingredients, the components to make such a standard?
So when I say that, it's because of all the collaborations that we've been involved with. We've worked with Adidas, we've worked with Converse, we've worked with Coach, we've worked with Uniqlo. I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
Do they come to you or do you go to them?
In some cases, they come to us. In some cases, we go to them.
When you go to a brand, what is the requirement? What is the baseline for you to go? This is a brand that we want to talk to.
Because it has to have a similar ethos to Keith Haring. So, for example, access is important, right? So we don't want something necessarily that costs $10,000, right? Because not everybody can afford that.
Right.
So affordability is a huge thing for us. Access, right?
Right.
Accessibility.
Right.
So it's like if you make cool stuff and it's accessible, aka affordable, it's chances are we're going to want to do something cool.
AKA Uniqlo.
Uniqlo is very affordable. It's very quality, and it just has a similar ethos. And we've collaborated with Uniqlo now for, I want to say, at least 20 years.
Really?
20, 25 years at least.
That's crazy.
It's one of our longest running collaborations, and it's still ongoing. And they're a great partner.
When someone comes to you, how do you determine? I know you said ethos, but I just want to see.
You
go to them.
It has to be a good match. It has to be a good match, especially now, because now people are seeing the proliferation of Keith Haring in a lot of places. So some brands are like, oh, me too. So it just has to make sense. We don't want to do the same thing that another brand has done. If they bring something different to it, they bring a different feel to it. H&M is a brand that we collab with because they do great stuff in the fast fashion space, and it's accessible, it's affordable, and it just has a good feel to it.
What was the worst potential brand collaboration in which you went, oh no, that's never going to happen?
The worst? I don't know. It's hard. I mean, there's been a lot. There's been a lot of things that we've said no to.
Okay.
I'll just say that. I don't want to drag anybody.
Okay. Well, I'm not saying I'm not saying you had to put any names, but
there's a lot of stuff that we have said no to just outright. That it just doesn't make sense for us.
Okay. Without saying any names, I know you're respectful. I'm equally respectful, but I think listeners are curious. Was there something that you just went, no? Like, no?
The short answer to that is yes.
Okay. Can you elaborate?
I would prefer not to go further.
Okay. Fine. I try, ladies and
gentlemen. In the
gentlemen.
interest of diplomacy, I prefer not
I said no names needed to be uttered.
No, I prefer not to go down that road. But,
right,
we say no. We say no a lot.
Okay.
We say no a lot. You have to, because you're taking care of, when we think about collaborating with brands, the prevailing thought in my mind is always, is this good for Keith? Period. He's not here to make those decisions, so we have to make them on his behalf. And then, you start to get complicated, right? Is it 31-year-old Keith, or is it 66-year-old Keith? Is it, this guy is forever 31 in a sense, right? So would he have evolved as a 66-year-old man and been like, you know what, maybe this is not the way to go? So you have to consider that, right? And the way you simplify it is this good for Keith? Is it or isn't it? And that's really the prevailing thought in making the decision on whether or not to collaborate with any brand or anything, really.
How does it feel, Gil, sitting there having to make that decision for your friend?
It's intense. I'm lucky that I don't have to make all of those decisions on my own. With the clothing, yes. With the licensing, yes. It is mostly me that makes that decision. But there are other decisions that we make as a foundation, as a board. There are 6 people on that board, and who we give grants to is not completely my decision. I have to we have to consult a board, and people apply for grants, and there are 6 of us that make a decision based on we have expertise.
Right.
We have consultants that that are experts in their field to help us make those decisions. So, we rely on a lot of expertise in order to make decisions. We're not just winging it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was literally the word that came to my mind. Bragged about the gold standard. I respect your brag.
It's a humble brag. It's a humble brag because, again, that money's not going into anybody's pocket. Like we're not just caking off and just putting it in our pocket. We are using that money to to give grants to organizations that enrich the lives of kids and people that struggle with HIV still. We live in a time now where you don't have to necessarily die
Right.
from HIV in the first world, so to speak, the quote unquote first world.
Understood.
Right? There are people that are in Africa that don't have access to these drugs that give
Correct.
you a life-saving, a life-saving drugs, right? So, sometimes we partner with, for example, we donated a print to the Elton John Foundation.
Oh, wow.
Right? So Elton John Foundation, they do more work in places like Africa than the Keith Haring Foundation does. So instead of just limiting ourselves to New York, sometimes we can partner with Elton John Foundation, give them money, and they do the work in those places where we don't generally function. So there's a lot. It's a lot. It involves a lot. There's a lot of cooperation. It's for the greater good. That we are trying to. We're trying to do this on Keith's behalf.
How do you make the determination? I understand about your criteria, but we're talking about licensing. And if you think about it, both New Yorkers growing up, we've seen brands literally, I'll give you a great example. When we were growing up, Gucci was the gold standard, but then all of a sudden, they took a turn because their IP was on everything, right? And that was a big thing in the 80s, right? Not unique to Gucci, but
Right.
any designer,
Yeah.
right? But there came a point in which they would flood, and it soured
Right.
the equity of the brand.
Right.
How do you and the board? Because now I realize
So
it's not
it's
just
interesting.
you.
It's not just me, right? And we have an agency, a licensing agent,
Oh,
right? That helps
okay.
us to make these decisions, right? So we do it with care. We do it with care. Like sometimes there are deals, for example, that it's like Japan only or China only. So we're very specific about what places in the world we want to hit also.
Like a MFN.
Like we want to be very precise and very strategic about where we place the work, and we're careful. We do it with care. We're not flooding. We don't, it's antithetical to the brand, because now Keith Haring is a brand. There's Keith Haring the artist and his artwork and exhibitions, which is one thing, and then there's the brand, which is we take very good care to not have that happen. Keith was he was very aware of Halston. Do you remember
Yeah,
Halston?
that was my mom's guy.
That was like, so Keith was like very aware, like, yo, like
And
I
these
don't
are
want that
examples,
to happen.
right.
I don't want that to happen to me.
Right.
And again,
Wow.
for as much as the imagery is out there, more than it has ever been.
Yeah, because it's out there.
More than it has ever been, we do take care that it is still cool. We do care that it's still cool, that it's not, it's not going to just be like pushed to the side. So, we care about it, and we are strategic about when, where, how much, and we consider that very carefully.
I want to bring this back. We met at the Bonhams auction, 2019. Now, you intentionally were there. What you don't know is I unintentionally was there.
Yeah.
I was actually going to another event at the Parks Department. I was aware of the auction because there was a big article in the Times. I just happened to be cutting that way, and the person in front of the auction house, I guess, thought that I was planning to go in. And this is why I always say, ladies and gentlemen, clothing is communication.
It is.
I was just walking, and I realized what it was, but I was like, oh, I'm going to meet my friend Liz, and da-da-da-da. And she kind of stopped me, and she said, oh, are you here for the... And I went, no, I'm not. She said, would you like to come in? And I mean, you see me. Yes.
Yes.
I would love to. Well, you can come in. And she signed me in on, I think she had a tablet.
Yep.
I texted my friend Liz, don't go to the Parks Department, we're going here, we're going here. I meet you, the rest is history. It's been a great, I would say an acquaintanceship. I've really enjoyed it. I think
Likewise,
that.
man.
It's just been dope. Particularly because we do New York stuff.
Yeah,
we talk about
absolutely.
We talk about New York stuff all the time and compare notes. That's
so
super
that was an interesting moment.
I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. Please tell the audience.
That auction took place because it's a convoluted long story. I will try to shorten it. There was a building owned by the Archdiocese of New York.
Right.
It's called Grace House.
Grace House, yeah.
Right? And in this Grace House, Keith Haring painted a mural. Basically, all his classic figures, black paint on the walls. And Grace House essentially was like a hangout for kids. It was like a place where kids can go to not be on the street. And there were some mentors there, and they kept the kids involved in activities and all this kind of stuff. And I guess somebody that went to Grace House knew Keith, invited him to paint the mural. Of course, Keith had no permission, painted it, and bounced. Right? Cool. So years later, we get into talks with this parish, and not the archdiocese specifically, but it was a separate parish, right?
Right, the local parish.
And we get into talks with them about, perhaps getting someone to buy the building so that it can be used to house gay kids that were homeless, that were kicked out of their homes for being gay, that kind of thing, right?
Mm.
So I suspect that the archdiocese was like, nah. Like, we want no part of that. I suspect.
All right.
Because what they went and did was they brought in some consultants and had them consult on how to remove these murals from these walls.
Right, an art preservation outfit.
So what they did, because this particular parish was in debt to the larger archdiocese.
Right.
And they figured out that if you extract this mural for $1 million, put it up for auction, you might come out ahead in less debt to the archdiocese. And oh, by the way, we're not going to tell the Keith Haring Foundation we're doing this.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
So they didn't tell us that they were going to do this. And
know
all
that.
the while we were in talks with them, like, hey, maybe we can get somebody to buy this building. And they were like, yeah. They were yesing us to death. And essentially, once the extraction happened, that's when Bonhams reached out to me. It's like, hey, we have this mural and we're going to auction it. And would you like to discuss and would you like to talk about it?
So you got okie doked.
In a sense, I knew we were obviously against it. But again, it was very new. I was very new in the position.
Oh.
So, you know, I kind of wanted to participate, even though it was not something we were in favor of.
Right.
I wanted to have the conversation. I wanted to say to, you know, to these people, like, you know, like I wanted to be, I wanted to, for our narrative to be out there. I didn't want to be spoken for. You understand? I didn't want somebody to assume that we were in favor of this because we weren't there. We just didn't show up. So I wanted to make sure, like, listen, we were not in favor of this, A, and B, you know, on some level, it's good that the mural was saved, right? It's almost like Keith was against people taking the subway drawings, but had someone not done that, they wouldn't exist today. Right?
Yeah.
So even though he was against it, the fact that some people did take them is a good thing because in historical terms, we can still enjoy them. Same thing for the mural. The mural was meant for kids, and it was meant for the kids to kind of give them a brighter day. But now that these kids are no longer there, the building has been sold off and whatever, the fact that the mural still exists in some form is a good thing. Even though it's owned by some private person who we have no idea who it is.
Still don't know.
Still don't know. So, you know, listen, it's, I don't know, it's complicated. I said it was a long, convoluted story, and that's the reason. It's, you know, it's in private hands. You know, it really shouldn't be. It should be for the public to enjoy.
Right.
But, you know, it is what it is.
I'm going to tell you, Gil, you were pissed that day.
Yeah, I was not happy.
And I did not know you.
Yeah, I wasn't happy about
started telling me that, you know, I'm just getting to know you, and I'm like, who, what? And you're like, this didn't have to happen, and
Yeah.
you were, and I was, you know, for me, I'm just like, what do you mean? I don't understand. Like, what?
Right. So, I mean, again, the reason I was there was so that nobody could speak for us. And I was I was probably not even the director, the executive director at the time. I was probably the acting director at the time. 2019, I was not fully in the position.
I see.
And I was kind of learning the ropes.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, you know, it was one of those things.
Well, I do remember this. Outside of your ire, you had on some Coach. I thought they were Coach.
Sneakers?
Yeah. I was like,
The Coach Keith
what?
Haring, yeah,
I think I
remember
took
that.
a photo of that.
Yeah.
I was
Yep,
like,
yep, yep.
where'd you cop those? Wow. I couldn't be happier. It was just the way I hoped.
Thank you, man. It was a pleasure. This was a long time coming. We had, you know, discussed this years and years ago.
Yeah.
Then COVID happened, and then, you know, it was just a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I feel like this finally happened when the time was right, and here we are, and I'm really happy that we did this.
Well, I'm in my glory. So I have some questions for you.
Yep.
So, why is fashion important?
Fashion is important because it is communication. It is unspoken language. You are saying something about yourself. You are expressing something about yourself without words. And depending on your fashion, it allows you access to places. It communicates something about you, whether or not you belong in a place or not. There's, you know, it has a lot of implications beyond looking and feeling good. It's another way to express yourself. It's communication, and you know, and it's fun.
Yeah, I agree. That's how we met. It granted me access.
Yeah.
What difference has fashion made in your life?
It's interesting because I feel like I have a dual life. Like I have these two different, very distinct parts of my life. I'm Gil Vazquez, the executive director of the Keith Haring Foundation. And I'm also Jibo the Pro. That's my alter ego, which is like my hip hop persona, you know, that I try to keep away from Gil. But the more that time goes on, they're becoming intertwined more and more these days. But hip hop, like I feel like my hip hop persona is a very different person, fashion wise even, than Gil Vazquez is. And sometimes he's, it doesn't matter. Sometimes, it depends on the place that I'm at, right? I'm not rocking this to the, to the gala, to the Smithsonian Archive of American Art Gala, right? I'm not doing that. But I could DJ in this outfit.
Absolutely.
So it's it depends. I have to pick my spots, and sometimes it's fun to be dressed in a tux and just a beautiful suit, and then also it's nice to feel comfortable and dress quote unquote down in my hip hop uniform.
Yeah, I totally agree. For people who are not seeing this but just hearing this, Monday through Friday, as I think Gil has noticed, I'm suited and booted. But we are recording this on a Saturday.
Yep.
And I wanted to represent. So I got my hoodie on,
Yeah.
I got my Levi's, and I got my Nike Uptowns.
Yeah, no, it's fun. The duality is fun.
It is.
I don't expect people in the art world to know anything about Jibo the Pro, the mixtape DJ from the 90s. There is a book out called Do Remember. It's a Rizzoli book, and I'm telling a bit of our story in that book. I used to DJ with this guy Double R, and we made these like incredible tapes in the 90s. And I don't expect anybody in the art world to know anything about that. They're
Right.
so removed from that because mixtapes was such a subculture of hip hop.
Yeah.
And we were impactful in that, but again, it's very separate from the art world. It's something that almost never comes up in my art world conversations.
Yeah. And understandable. I understand the whole thing about duality.
And it's fun though. It's fun. It's
Yeah, it should be.
You get to be a fly on the wall a little bit. It's kind of cool.
I ask this of all my guests. What is the top fashion tip you would give the everyday man so he could look his best?
The top fashion tip that I would give to a man is to wear something that is comfortable, that is in line with who you are. In line with who you are, and sometimes in line with who you aspire to be.
Mic drop?
Mic drop.
That was dope. Gil, I've said it numerous times, but it's always going to be worth repeating for me. I really want to thank you for having me, for me personally, in this hallowed room and space.
Thank you, man. It is a pleasure for me to share Keith with the world. It's technically my job, but it is something that I love to do because of how much that man gave me, like how much how much wisdom he imparted. I'll never be able to repay him, like never. So as long as I get to do this, it is going towards that. It is helping to sort of repay the debt. But he changed my life for the better, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to repay that debt.
Well, as a kid in the 80s, he impacted my life, and to bring this, to my full circle, I just really want to thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
It was really
Bro,
dope.
you're ready.
Appreciate it.
My brother.